Well, beginnings and endings, those are the things you tend to remember, right? So thanks for being here tonight. And this is the closing of a chapter. So this tends to be one of those things you remember. Oh, you remember that last night we were at Church of the City. So thanks for being here and being a part of that. And as Kevin said, we're so grateful for a season of provision. When we came to the end of our time at the factory, and we had multiple things kind of fall apart right at the end. To have Church of the City step in and go, hey, you can have our space. You can rent our space. But you're welcome to come here, and the timing was great, and we're thankful for it, and really, really excited about what's ahead. How many of you have actually been to the Seaboard location? Any of you been there yet? Last week or this week? It's pretty special. Who would have thought an old dojo or dance place? But our team, they're unreal, and they start on Saturday night. And they're setting the whole thing up, and it's really, really special. Just it feels congruent with who we are because it's just warm and close. A friend of mine was telling me how he just went to a Coldplay concert recently. He said, I went to the concert, and he's a musician by trade and does pretty well, and so his shows are pretty big and the whole thing. And so he said he was at Coldplay, and he was in Texas Stadium, and he was like, they're that big, and he's like, And I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, that wasn't that inspiring. He said the next night they had a private event with just about 300 or 400 people, and he said he was, just about maybe 7 rows from the stage, and he was like, it was magical. The whole night I was lost in it all. And I said, well, he was like, and he goes, trust me, I'm going to school about what I do for a living. Like, I was really affected by it, impacted. And I said, what is it? He goes, I don't know. There's something about space, that we're affected by space. There's an architecture, there's a spirituality to architecture. And there's something about being able to be close. And so, thanks for being here. Here, you won't get that next week, by the way. This morning, did any of you come this morning and for some reason you just came back tonight? Well, thanks for being with us. This morning was a trip. Ask somebody later. Anyway, so the goal for tonight is to talk about who we are as a church, and this really kind of like one of those Vision Sundays kind of thing. Like, who are we and where are we going? And this is kind of a big deal because for a number of years, we've been unsure. Like, what are we supposed to do now? There's been a little bit of that. And so to kind of best frame up who are we have to know a little bit of where we've come from. So most of you know the story, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but just a quick frame of reference. Back in 2013, Angie and I were not living in Nashville. We were living in another town, and we had come to a place where we wanted so much more out of our faith journey and our experience with other Christ followers. And the religious kind of umbrella in which we were in seemed inconsistent with what we understood from Scripture. And so we were like, man, we were doing youth ministry. We'd done youth ministry for 13 years. I was then teaching as a professor at a university. And it was like, what next? What do we do? And just felt this call from God, like, well, you're supposed to pastor. So if you know my story at all, I'm a preacher's kid. I did not want to pastor. This is the last thing on the planet I wanted to do. How many of you have ever said, by the way, God, I never want to do that, and that's the thing? Yeah. So anyway, okay, yes, we'll go. And long story short, we wound up in Nashville, and we had a dream really for 2 things. There were 2 kind of like primary things. There were multiple things we dreamed about in the expression of the church, but 2 dominant things. The first was, what would it be like to be in a place where, like, the service wasn't like on the clock, or there wasn't like pressure to like, we got to do this, do that, but like there was space, and you had space to feel, and the Spirit had room to move. And if you needed to adjust, you would adjust, because how the Spirit was moving trumped whatever the organizational plan was. So that was a dream for us. Like, we didn't know if that could really happen anywhere. Like, could you experience the movement of God where you really felt known by Him? And there wasn't just an information exchange, but there was a knowing that happened in the space. When you gathered for, and not just in the gathering, which typically happens on a Sunday, but also in villages. Like, what would that be like? And that kind of led us into our small groups. Well, that kind of led us into the second thing. What would it be like to be vulnerable with one another? What would it be like to, like, not pretend, but when people ask you how you're doing, you tell them. Granted, we've probably taken that a little extreme. You know, people see me in the store. I'm like, "Hey, how you doing?" You know, they'll say, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not really depressed as much anymore. You know, I'm thinking about it." And they're like, "Well, you know, oh, I was just grabbing some milk." Like, I'm like, "Oh, sorry, I'm much better." You know, but like, what would it be like to just be like in the moment and really think and respond to that in honesty? And I'm telling you, I promise you, when we started Journey in 2015, that was like it was a dream. What over the last 10 years has become pretty normative to us was a dream. I didn't really know what happened. And the next thing you know, about 10 years later, we woke up one day and it was part of the rhythm of our lives. I'm around all kinds of people who are, they share with me their stuff, and I share with me on the board, just talking about life. And there's confession sometimes in the moment, and then there's celebration, and we're reveling in the grace of God, and nobody's kind of positioning with one another. And I mean, you know, we got lots of other brokenness issues, but there's this honesty thing, and it has been beautiful. And then I can't tell you how many times that like sometimes I'm trying to just hold it together up here because I just sense the Spirit in such a powerful way, and tears come pretty quickly, and smiles and laughter from knowing God and being known by Him. And part of the story became. Let's embrace being a church for the brokenhearted. When your heart's broken, it comes typically from some kind of rejection or judgment. Something didn't go well typically in a relationship, and you got rejected, or there was deep loss, or you were judged or misjudged, and you're brokenhearted. And what's the number one value when you're brokenhearted? What do you care more than anything? Like, you don't care how many carbs are on the table. When your heart is broken, it's your highest level of concern is not what you're eating. You know, it's not the temperature of the room. The highest level of concern, the greatest value when your heart's broken is this place emotionally safe? Are you emotionally safe? Can I be like? Are you gonna judge me? Are you gonna bring pain? Are you gonna shame me? Like, I'm pretty fragile. It becomes like this deep value. And I gotta tell you, I've been through a season. We've had a lot of loss, a lot of change, all those kinds of things. And some of my own story. I've been through a season of being brokenhearted. And I've said this to you before. This is one of the safe places for me. How many pastors can say that? I get up and I tell you about hey, I'm dealing with depression, or I'm walking through whatever I'm dealing with. Nobody sends me an email like, "You're such an idiot. You should step down and stop being a pastor." And but in churches that happens all the time. Do you understand? There are a lot of churches. If somebody they'd be like, "Whoa, time out, kick that guy out." The grace you show me, the grace you show our pastors, the grace you show one another. I'm just telling you, it's rare. I wish it wasn't rare. And part of the next dream is, what if it wasn't rare? What if we were able to take this thing we've experienced and be able to give it away? And I'm a little ahead of myself. That's where we're going. But it is right now. There aren't a whole lot of people that get to experience this kind of love and grace that comes from the heart of God. And it's beautiful. And that's who we are. And that's worth embracing, and it's worth celebrating. And so the who we are is, we are a place for the brokenhearted. And we always will be. And I want to say this because there is some morphing and some changing, and there's some stretching that's ahead for us. But I want to say this. We must always be that. God has placed that mantle upon us as a church, as a body of believers. If at any point in time, me, another pastor, somebody gets up here and they're shaming and they're condemning and they use the word of God as a power over form of control, you got to hold us accountable. We can never be that. If somebody's, I don't know, I get jacked up and I'm off, or somebody else is off, or maybe it's in the moment. We get tripped up by something and we're in the flesh, and like that's a place you have to hold us accountable. And not just here, but like in villages and other things. Like if somebody might be new to Journey and they come from another church experience and they're shaming in the way they're talking, you got to be like, whoa, time out. We have to help you a little bit here. You're shooting all over everybody. Shoulding all over it. Should is a shaming word. Y'all are like, what are you saying? Sorry, it just kind of came out fast. Should is a shaming word. And you're like, well, we're wrapping it up, that's for sure. Should. And by the way, if this is new to you, if you're like, whoa, I never thought. Like, think of the next time you're like, hey, you shouldn't do that. Listen to the way you use the word should. It's typically a shaming mechanism. It's meant to embarrass the other person or motivate them through some kind of strange, tortured guilt. That's really what it is. And we do it to ourselves all the time. And I got a passage that's going to relate to that in a minute too. All right, who we are, Church for the Brokenhearted, certainly a group of creative people. We're going to talk about that. But who are we going to be? What is God calling us to? Our first season was dominantly filled with healing and sending. People would begin to heal up a little bit, and the compulsion then is, well, this is what's, if you start to heal, eventually there's a tipping point where we have to give it away. And if we don't have organizational processes or we don't have staffing to help create conduits and lanes to give that away, the natural thing to do is to leave here to give it away. So it occurred to us, well, it might be nice to have some people stay. And in the sending is a beautiful part. We don't want that to go away either. I think we mentioned this. I mean, we've had 20 people, if you include spouses, 20 people go and plant churches in 10 years. I mean, like, significant part of church plants. If they weren't pastoring themselves, they were part of the core team to do that. Like, we need to keep doing that. That's beautiful. But there's more for us collectively as a church to do as we lean forward in faith. We've come through a season, and you know what's happened? Many of us have been restored. Now, if you're like, man, I don't really know that word. If you type it into your phone, the little red line will come up. It's not a word. CJ made it up. Restoryteller, restory, but you're going to hear a lot about it. And here's why. Because it really works for us. And I know so many of you. I had a gentleman tell me this morning afterwards. He's from Seattle. And he said, we moved here. I thought I was supposed to be here to be an architect or whatever else, and tears in his eyes. And he said, I didn't know that God brought me here to save me. This church helped me see what I didn't see. And I've been restored. There's a restoration that's happened in my life from brokenness, and I have a new story full of redemption. And of course, we were having a conversation about he sensed God was pulling him into like a faith journey, and he was terrified, and it was beautiful because he knew God was calling him to something, and he was going to have to step into it. So one last thing kind of on who we are, and then we'll start moving into the who we're going to become. We had 4 imperatives. If you went through the discovery process or what we called explore in the early days, we had 4 imperatives, and they eventually took shape in the form of our liturgy. What I mean by liturgy is, church has a way of doing things. So some churches you might show up and they might read from the Book of Common Prayer, or they might repeat a certain phrase. They might say the Lord's Prayer every Sunday. So different churches have different forms of liturgy. So we kind of fell into our own liturgy. We have a few songs in the beginning, we have a message, and we have this kind of extended time in the end where we have stations and there's space to go take communion and all that sort of thing. And it just kind of played out related to our values. So the first thing we do is gather for worship. Number 1. And I want to tell you something. I'm talking to a neuroscientist friend of mine, Jeff, last week. And he was telling me about the brain, and I was asking him questions about my brain, which is entertaining. And we were having this dialogue, and he said, well, here's why I believe so firmly in cognitive therapy. I said, what do you mean? So I believe in cognitive therapy because what's happening is you're creating new neural pathways in the brain. Based on our programming from our family of origin and our childhood, we have neural pathways where our decisions travel. They're like highways, and they're well paved. They're well traveled. And sometimes it's like, why do I keep doing that? I want that to change. It just keeps happening. You have to create a new neural pathway. And this is my neuroscientist friend who said, this is why prayer is such a big deal. I have to pray each day. Because when I'm praying, physiologically, my body is changing. Synapses are firing differently, and I'm creating a neural pathway that's acknowledging that I'm not in control. There's a God greater than me, that I need him, and I'm literally speaking this out, what we call prayer. I'm speaking this out, and something new is forming in my brain. And it's changing the way I see the world and who I'm willing to trust. Why the spiritual practice of prayer is so significant. We gather on Sundays, and you know what's happening? Those of you who are consistent, some of you are like, yeah, this is my first time in 3 years. But if you do this like on a regular basis, it creates a neural pathway. That's why Sunday comes, and you're in your mind, you're like, the question, at least, whether or not you answer, whether or not you choose to come. But the question comes up in your brain, especially if you grew up in the South, am I going to church this morning? Like it just a thing comes up, like it's a question. I know all kinds of friends of mine that live in the North. That question never shows up Sunday morning. They don't go to church then. It's not even a thing on the radar. But for us culturally, or if you grew up in a church, or if this has been a spiritual practice, the very act of gathering, neural pathway, spiritual practice, habit, is actually an act of obedience. Just the fact that you came tonight, act of obedience. Act of worship. God, I'm gathering because you've told me to do so, and you're actually receiving a benefit from it. Number 2, we're formed as we listen, pray, and confess. And this kind of began to play out for us. By the end of a message, there's a space to go, hey, what do you need to confess? Is there anything you need to repent? And we call repentance alignment here. Like, how do I align back with God? If sin is missing the mark, what am I missing out on because I'm blocked up in my sin? Oh, I need to speak that out, get realigned. So I'm listening, I'm praying, I'm confessing. God, get me right back where I need to be. We commune. That's what the bread and the wine, the table. Some of you go by yourself and there's a communion with the Trinity as you're saying to God, thank you for the great sacrifice of your Son, this love story. And some of you, sometimes you go up with family members, you might pray together, you go up with your village, and you're just communing. And there's a sense of gratitude. You can't take the Lord's Supper and not be thankful. That's why we take it. Oh, Lord, wow, what you did for me. It pulls up the spirit of gratitude. It carves away at the complaint mechanism in us and makes us instead grateful. And finally, we're sent on mission. So at the end of most services, we send you out and we say, go and love well. The center of this whole thing is to love. So we're not supposed to just wrap it up here and go, that was a nice experience. We're meant to go find someone who needs to be loved and love them. So this is part of our liturgy. This is like who Journey's been. That's going to continue. Who we are is going to continue. It's going to morph and change a little bit, but those centerpieces to who we are going to continue. Here's what we've recognized as a church. That what Satan meant for evil, God transforms to good. And we remember that our lives are not woven together with regrets, but rather threads of redemption. If you've been a Journey for any length of time, that comes up over and over again. God does not delete your story. He redeems it. If you go, not there yet, I can't accept that. I don't like myself. I don't like my story. And I can't let myself, or maybe a better way to say this, I can't let God love me. If you've not yet learned to see this, you're in spiritual infancy. Well, that's not meant to shame you. It's just meant to give you an awareness. What that means is you're stuck in an infant stage spiritually. In your fear, you're choosing the identity of a victim, which means I did this to myself, or someone else did this to me, and I'm afraid of it happening again. And in my fear, I have to be in control. In order to be in control, I have to create a certain level of safety mechanism. If I receive grace, I lose control. If I forgive, I lose control. So, to stay armored up, I got to stay in the victim place And when anybody wants to ask me about what's going on in my life, I got to make sure I blame other people as to how this is the reason I got here. I get it. I've done it. The problem is it doesn't work. Not long term. Because what happens? The hole's still in your heart. There's an absence of connection because people can't get in. You're armored up. And you're not growing. You're stuck. Victimization is the cheap umbrella in the rainstorm. The shame tempest is coming, and playing the victim does not keep us dry. Listen to what Brene Brown says. Owning our own story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy. The experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. And you know what that means? It means at some point we have to visit our story. At some point we go, what is holding me back? What's the unforgiveness thing? Or what am I afraid to let go of? And what do we need to speak out and bring into the light? And then there's this freedom that comes out with it. And the shame dissipates. And it's why we have to construct spaces where there's a safe enough to lean into it and do it and know that the love of God is here. And this brings us back to the centerpiece. If God doesn't love you, you definitely don't want to enter that place. If God is not a God of love, but he's just a God of wrath and judgment, well, why would you ever want to go there? But if on the other hand, grace is real, and in spite of our own failures, or what other people have done to us, God actually deeply, passionately loves us, gave his only son for us. Now, if that's true, then it's something we must accept or we'll never get free. It becomes the centerpiece to all we believe. A few weeks ago, I taught a foundational passage from Genesis that described man's fall from innocence. If you were with us a few weeks ago, I talked about this in length. Adam and Eve bought into the lie that knowing good and evil would make them like God. What it did instead was steal their innocence, make them self-conscious and ashamed. That's what happened when they got there. Oh, I'll know the difference between good and evil. Isn't that a good thing? No, because now you're preoccupied with it. Now you wake up every morning and that's what you're aware of. What went wrong and what went right. That's what the garden, that's what the tree, that's what the fruit, that's what happened. So the shame can come up quite easily. Why? Because of that broken, fallen nature in us. I got an email from a lady who added this further insight, and I thought this was, she sent me these emails like, oh, this is so good. And she added this insight to that whole thing in the garden, and it relates to this idea of shame and love. She says this: I now see that if we didn't have to judge ourselves as being good or bad, we wouldn't live with the shame and judgment that causes perhaps most of the pain that so often results in addictions of any kind. See, do you see what she's saying? It's the evaluation of, am I good enough? And comparisons. Well, that person's better than me. That's where we get tripped up all the time. When you're laying in bed and you're thinking about the conversation you might have to have with somebody, how much is it is, am I good enough? Or what are they going to say? Or I'm comparing. So much of that stuff. So she says, being in recovery has helped me heal from shame and find peace. The peace God wanted us to always know, but lost when we learned that we could be wrong or bad rather than just being as we are and loved. In Genesis, God would come and walk with them through the garden. Intimacy, fellowship, connection, unbroken. God loves you regardless of what you've done. While we were yet sinners, he gave up his son for you and me. In the throes of our grotesqueness, he loved us and still loves us. It's us. We're the ones doing all the measurement stuff about whether or not we're good enough. That's because the brokenness comes up on us. And it's so easy to get spun out in it. Here's the hope. The hope, the desire, we want you to be your unique you. You go, Jamie, if you had if there was a dream for us as a church, like what the dream, what's the next thing? Is there a thing? You know what it'd be? That none of us, now I realize this is a little utopian. It's going to take us a lifetime to get there, and then we'll all have to die and go to heaven to actually fully achieve it. But this is part of the journey. Imagine, just for a second, imagine none of us were self-conscious. Imagine the insecurities were not like amped up to the top. Imagine there was a space and a group of people that we could be with that was like, I see you. I see you for you, and there's nobody like you. No, like don't change. Like you are you, just be all of that. Your life itself actually is a work of art. Your story exists for a reason. We don't want to delete that. Like your story's here. Yeah, but you don't understand my dad. No. Because in that brokenness, something was shaped in you. God's going to redeem that and now use this for good. The pain you went through, it's going to be used for good if you'll just embrace it. Don't run from it. Don't hide. This is where we all truly are creative people. Because you might go, I don't really use that term about myself. I'm not really creative. I'm an organizer. I really like to manage things. No. But your life is a form of creativity because there's nobody like you. What would it be like for all of us to be who God wants us to be? So I'll tell you something about me. I am no longer, the goal for my life is not to be perfect. Growing up in my faith tradition, it was like, I gotta be, the goal, I'm gonna shoot for perfection. I've not been real successful at that. And I'm endlessly frustrated every day with my failure to be perfect. I gotta tell you, if you're like, hey, I'm emotionally amazing, and I'd like to see what it would be like to be worn out, try to be perfect every day. You go, wait, so you're saying it's cool to just sin the way I want? No. Paul talks about the same thing. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is God calls us over and over again to be who he's created us to be. It's a shifting of the goal. Live into who God has called you to be. Jeremiah 29:11, Psalm 139. These passages at length describe that no one else is like you. God has a purpose and plan for your life. Will you live into that? So I don't have to try to be somebody else. I'm supposed to be Jamie. I'm not supposed to pastor like somebody else. I'm supposed to pastor like God wants Jamie to pastor. Oh, this is hard for me. I'm like, well, I think pastors are supposed to do that, and I think pastors should do that, and I think, it's shame or comparison or supposed to. And you know what happens? I'll tell you what happened. I got in the wrong lane. I woke up, we went through a season of transition, and the rescuer in me, they're like, I think I should be the Messiah. And part of this is my northern, blue collar, we're going to pull up the boots, we're going to gut it out. And I burned out. And here's the crazy thing. The whole thing, our first 10 years, we're not going to burn out. We're going to Sabbath. We're going to be healthy. Nobody's burning out in this church. Toast. Fried the motherboard. Somewhere in the transition, now granted, there were a lot of things unstable and things were falling apart. There's a lot going on. But I disproportionately carried what I wasn't meant to carry. And it hurt an internal me. And part of it was because, you can use the metaphor, I'm out of my lane, I wasn't in my sweet spot, whatever those things were. But some of it just came from a sin place of me going, I have to rescue. And there are other people with a lot of great gifts, and you actually just need to get out of the way. And stop with the you're supposed to thing. I wonder, as parents, do some of you have your parenting and you're like, but I'm supposed, it's hard to even lay your head down in a pillow at night and just be satisfied with the day of parenting? Because you got somebody's voice in your head some of you are like, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. What? Because somebody's voice is in your head. Too much sugar today. And your mother's been dead for 10 years. Did you hear? You're laying in bed like my mother's in bed with us. Talking to me about sugar. Like somebody's voice is there saying you were supposed to do this thing. And it's so easy to give our souls over to something, some previous programming, somebody else's thing for us. For me, I stopped creating and I got lost managing. Not something I was designed by God to do. And they were just the expectations of ghosts. It wasn't from you. Nobody was sending me emails like, Jamie, we want you involved in more of the problem solving. Nobody said that. And I say they're the expectations of ghosts because I say they were like formless beings. But the truth of the matter is we're in spiritual warfare. Some of them were the voices of demons. We're in the throes of a battle. And you are too. I stopped creating and my soul started dying. And sadly, that which I valued most, I surrendered for the wrong reasons. So I've spent the last few months slowly healing. Thank you for being patient with me as I worked that out. And I discovered something about myself and see if this might be true about you. When I stopped creating, I stopped being. Like the light in my eyes was going out. I stopped being tuned to the present. I failed to watch the movement of the clouds. I'm too distracted to notice the wind against my cheek. And instead of looking at my daughter, I'd be following along with the words on the page when she'd read at night. I don't care about reading a book. When I'm in a good place, I ain't reading a book. I want to watch my daughter. Just see her lips move, her eyes squint when she reads. That's being present. Talk about trivial things with my wife rather than just sit quietly, be with each other, look into each other's eyes. It's nothing to say. Just, I'm here. I see you. Julia Cameron says this: we need time and space to metabolize our impressions. If you're gunning it, man, like life is at a full tilt 24/7, I'm going to tell you, you'll hit a wall eventually. We desperately need space to feel. That's part of the reason on the back end of our worship experience every Sunday, there's some space here. Don't rush it. If you need to talk to God about something, just talk to God. The soul doesn't evolve or grow. It cycles and twists, repeats and reprises, echoing ancient themes common to all human beings, which is hopeful. This isn't new. But the soul is always circling home. Its odyssey is a drifting at sea, a floating toward home, not an evolution toward perfection. And there's hope in that. When you beat yourself up because you're just not, quote, good enough, you forget, wait, I have a deep longing in my heart to return to Eden. And one day I'm going to spend eternity with heaven and God. I'm floating toward that. Can I be in a sea of grace rather than lost in this obsession with being perfect? When you get stuck in that place, the comparison, the supposed to, and the perfectionism, I'm going to tell you this: anxiety comes rushing in. Here's a great line about anxiety, and it's so true. Anxiety is nothing but fear inspired by an imagined future collapse. That's what my anxiety. What if? But maybe somebody didn't. We should have. There goes that should word. Anxiety. I'm imagining some future collapse that may or may not happen. By the way, all the things I had imagined, none of them have happened yet. It's a failure to trust myself, to be sure, but more significantly, God. And I forget about two things. And they're two of the most important things we can remember about God. And this becomes the springboard for who Journey is in the future. So you have to wrestle these two things down if you haven't yet. Number one, you are adored by God. I'm adored. Adored. God loves me. And if I ever walk into a circumstance where I think I'm going to be measured or evaluated or judged, you know what I'm doing right now? I'll stop before I walk in and go, oh yeah, I'm kind of a big deal, right? In your eyes? Like you love me? It's really clear I'm not a big deal for me. That part's worked out right now. I might need help again later on, but I got that part down. I can't make it on my own, that's clear. You love me? I'm that special? I'm adored by you? Yeah. That's right, son. Okay. I'm about to walk into a room full of impaired individuals. And you are. It's because everybody's impaired. People who judge you, people who want to say things about you, they're working out their own story and their own stuff. So I walk into a room sometimes like, no, he's got a broken leg, broken arm, he's got a broken face. I really want to help with his broken face. No. It's humanity, it's relationships. But we all have to wrestle this down. If we're going to move into the future thing that I think Journey's calling to, it's a lifetime. I get it. It's a lifetime of staying in this. But there has to be at least a breakthrough for you where you own this. Number one, adored by God. Number two, that God redeems all things. And here's the thing. Because when you see that in you, wow, God redeemed that. It was awful, and yet God's using it for good. What? Really? It helps you see it in others. You go, how do I know? Give me an idea, if I know I've caught on to this. Here's how you'll begin to know. When you spend time with another person, you start to look at them through the same lens. Romans 12. This is our passage. And then I'll close with kind of here we're going. Here's where we're going, all right? So we're on the downward slope. Romans 12. Verse 1, therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is a spiritual act of worship. To actually give of your story, give that story back to God. It's an act of worship. Don't conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's why it's important that you have spiritual practices in your life. Be renewed. You're growing. You're changing. And then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. So how do we recognize that we're loved by God and we're going to give him our story back? For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the measure of faith that God has given you. So don't get lost in pride. Recognize that you actually have been given a very specific gift from God, and you've been given this measure of grace. Now here's what follows. He's now going to list off superpowers. You and I have superpowers, in case you didn't know. Just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we who are many form one body. Each member belongs to all the others. We have different superpowers according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is prophesying, you're really good at being direct, and you're the perfect thing is like a trainer guy or drill sergeant guy. You're prophetic. Okay, then let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it's serving, let him serve. If it's teaching, let him teach. If it's encouraging, let him encourage. If it's contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it's leadership, let him govern diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. Some of you are really, really good at some of this stuff. You're really good at leadership. You're really good at hospitality. Your brownies are out of this world. You need to bake them more. There's a thing about, and you know what typically happens? Like somebody else has the gift of teaching. You're like, man, I wish I could teach like that. Somebody else has the gift of leadership. Oh, I wish I could lead like that. And that guy, he's so discerning. I wish. We're too busy looking at other people's. But you have a gift. By the way, when you get married, usually the other person got a different gift. It's kind of weird how that works out. You have these gifts. They're who you are. They're a unique you, and they're meant to be creatively expressed. But they get lost, and we hold on to them, and we tuck them in here, and we don't use them when we don't believe that we're adored by God, when we don't believe that he redeems all things. We don't think what we have to offer has great meaning. Or it's disproportionate. We think what we have to offer is amazing, and people don't realize what an incredible person we are. So we get lost in one spectrum or the other. And so then he goes on to say this. So this is how you can contrast. Don't conform to this world. Let me show you how not to, because the world does the opposite of this. So I'm going to show you, this is how you can love. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another among yourselves, above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord, which is kind of like, hey, just stay at it. Don't give up. Persevere. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Oh, that's hard. But that's different. The conforming of the world is like, that guy did what? Oh, that guy. We get all fired up. No, don't conform to the world. Like, be different. You're going to create curiosity when you love differently. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Be empathetic. Care for people. Live in harmony with one another. Like, we got to work really hard at reconciliation. Don't just go running off and never deal with it. Oh, I hate conflict, so I avoid it. And you got all these like open-ended relationships. None of them got resolved. No. Live in harmony. Like, I know it's awkward, it's weird, but like, let's work at it. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Whoever in your mind isn't quite fit the thing and they're not a good networking opportunity, who cares? Talk to them anyway. Love them. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. There it is again, reconciliation. The Spirit is a reconciliatory spirit. Tonight, like some of you tonight, you might need to find somebody in here tonight and be like, I'm holding this unforgiveness, this victim thing. I'm sorry. Or, I give you the cold shoulder. Oh, I don't look at you. Here's why. I'm owning it. I just want to take responsibility for me because I'm doing everything I can because I'm not conforming. I don't want to be like the world. I want to be me. I don't want my gifts to contribute to the kingdom. I want to lean forward in creativity, not be reactionary. That's part of what's ahead for us as a church. To take our gifts and fling them into the world. And not be afraid of being judged, compared, misunderstood. But to do it. To go for it. And to love. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. Now keep in mind, the opening line was God's mercy. So here you got revenge and mercy juxtaposed. It's another conversation. But if you can go, no, God, I don't want your mercy. Okay. Then you'll experience wrath simply because sin has consequences. So sin leads to death. You will experience the wrath of God because he does not like sin. But mercy is available if you'd like it. When you go, I'm going to take revenge in my own hands, you're stepping in the way of God, who is a lover ultimately, who's pursuing that person. He'll break their life down to get their attention. Now, they may not choose to surrender, but that's on them, not on you. Don't take their thing into your hands so you can make them pay. See how this is different than the world. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. Take a meal to the person who judged you most harshly. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. You know what that means? That's another way for saying, in doing this, you're going to create a very awkward moment. Because they're going to be like, what? What are you doing here? I don't know, just was praying for you and felt like God wanted me to bring you a meal. And just run in the car before you say anything you regret. And you know what? They're going to be like, they close the door and their spouse is like, who is that? Jamie. He baked us a pie. It's probably not any good. It's laden with poison. You know, like, but they're going to be confused. That's when he says burning holes, like what? I don't. Love disrupts people. They can't they can't be in control anymore. Jesus did this over and over and over again, by the way. Always disrupted people. He disrupted their forms of control. And finally, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Love yourself. It's foundational. Avoid conformity. Stop comparing yourself. Realize you're unique and have a superpower that is unique to you. Be creative. Apply that gift to the kingdom, to other people. A great place to start is the people you hate the most. Use that power to love creatively, and when you do, it'll be a stark contrast to the world, and you'll create curiosity. You'll be leaving breadcrumbs to the gospel. Well, I'm not sure any of us will ever be fully healed. Many of us have spent this last season of life healing. If you've come to Journey recently, maybe this is kind of still thing really fresh for you. But a lot of our folks they've come and they've healed, done some healing. But you know what happens? Eventually, you have to give. That's what I said in the beginning. There's a compulsion. Something has to happen. So let me summarize the transition for Journey, especially as we go to a new space. We're probably going to hire 2 new staff members this week, a new village pastor, a new serve pastor. We're just in the final kind of conversations with 2 guys that are amazing guys. I mean, and have a full staff contingent for the first time in honestly a very, very long time. Like God's brought this whole new team of people. There's a new space. Like there really is this rebirth, and we're just going, God, what do you want us to do? This is what we sense. Journey will never cease to be a safe haven for the wounded. We will continue to be the campfire where you can come and get warm. It needs to be that. But the next season of our church will be marked by our creativity and generosity. We will give sacrificially of our time, talents, resources, and most importantly, we have to employ the superpowers. If you go, all right, all this superpower talk, I forgot what my spiritual gifts were. How do I know what they are? Ask Kevin, he'll tell you. Now we have like a thing that can help you. It's like an online thing, and if you're like, truthfully, most of your friends will be able to tell you. If you don't know what it is, they're gonna be like, oh, you're really good at this. I am? Yeah. Like use that for the kingdom. Don't be afraid. Lean into it. Henry Nouwen says this: our humanity comes to its fullest bloom in giving. Some of you have experienced a certain wonder with God, an experience with God, a growth as a person, but you haven't quite gotten to the dessert yet. The dessert is in the giving. It's in the generosity. That's what it is. I think in some ways we kind of started Journey with the dessert. We did. We've been generous with our staff and our people and church planning and money. And we give things away like crazy. And it's beautiful. I don't ever want it to go away. But it has to become more collective. And a little more intentional. And follow some paths. And one of those paths is to take those creative juices in you and give them a place. Like you have a unique design. We don't want you to be anybody else. Just you. And whatever it looks like for us to help you be that person. Pull out all those other voices. Nouwen goes on to say this: the real question is not what can we offer each other. That's typically a transactional exchange. He says this: who can we be for each other? Hey man, who do you need in your life right now? Man, honestly, I just need a hug. Okay. Honestly, I want to start up this business, but I don't know where to. I'm not a good business person. Can you introduce me to somebody who's good at business and entrepreneurial thing? Yeah, okay. Honestly, I got this dream to do whatever, but I honestly I can't manage myself out of my bedroom. I'm. Does somebody who's they're so creative with the way they manage. Okay. We don't want your dreams to die. If God has put something in you, He's given you this vision, we want you to be released. So I can have some kind of fulfillment. Yeah, but honestly, that's almost becomes secondary. Yeah, you'll be fulfilled, but you'll be fulfilled because you're obeying God. Push away all the supposed tos and live a life of creativity, risk, courage, and beauty. There's more in you than you know. Your uniqueness and flavor is unlike anyone else. The light of God is displayed distinctively through your brokenness. The light refracts differently in your life than it does mine. It does. And the people who have eyes to see, they see it. Together, we will find the brokenhearted, and through our brokenness and courageous creativity, we will awaken their imaginations to the love story of God. I really believe this is ahead for us. There are broken-hearted people out there. And we're going to find them. We're going to love them. They might even happen to come to church with us, but honestly, we know we got a safe place where they can heal. But maybe they'll go to somebody else's church. That's all right. We're going to live on mission because that's what God's called us to. And we're going to use these gifts that He's given us. I'll close with this story. Now, he says, he tells his story. He's a guy who was a professor. He's a really smart guy. He struggled with his own sexual identity. He's a guy who deeply loved God. He just pretty vulnerable and open with his story. He eventually kind of took himself offline in kind of the public sphere. And he spent the large portion of the end of his life with those who were mentally challenged, those with special needs. And he writes in his book, he talks about how significant they were for him. And this is what he says. He said, these folks that I worked with, it's not an issue of talent. Few had any sort of talent to be proud of. Few could contribute to an open market society. Few would ever win an award. And yet, he writes, their so visible brokenness has in some mysterious way allowed them to offer their gifts freely and without inhibition. May that be true of us. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me?